Hi, Troy. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. I just want to welcome everyone, firstly, to the first episode of CAPIC's IMMeSupport Student Spotlight podcast. And this is a podcast that is all about sharing the journeys of our student and new RCIC members, what inspires them, why they chose immigration consulting, and where they hope to go in their careers. And today, kicking off the first episode is Troy. So I'm gonna let you take it away with an intro. And maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about your background, why you decided, like what exactly motivated you to pursue immigration consulting.
Yeah, it's a very long journey, and interestingly enough, things connect. So I worked in IT business for many years. I retired from IBM in 2023 after 27 years in a lot of different management roles. My last role at IBM was required me to be responsible for a very large international assignment program where we brought IT employees from India and the Philippines to work for a period of time, anywhere from 6 months to up to 3, 4 years in Canada. It involved managing that entire process, so immigration, relocation, um, and working with employees and management in India and the Philippines. So literally, you took someone and you managed the entire time all through that process to bring them to Canada, help them find places to work, so not to work, but to live, and for their kids' schools and all those things, got them settled, managed them from an employee perspective, and then help them return when their assignments are finished. So all of the changes that there's been with immigration legislation and policy, starting back in 2010 especially, required a lot of time to understand the changes and implement business processes that addressed it. And that was my job. So literally, I started from the ground up, working with the IBM leadership team to help create and manage the International Assignment Program. And it had been quite a great journey. So when I retired, I had so much, working relationships and knowledge about immigration, and I had become, I did not realize, quite interested and intrigued by the entire process, but also all of the things that it's connected to, the economics of Canada, the policies, the personal stories of people who are going through this process. And kind of halfway through the program last year, the GDIP, the Graduate Diploma in Immigration and Citizenship Law, I realized I'd been through almost all of these stages because I myself, I started off as a student. So I was an international student from Trinidad. I went to Ryerson, uh, in a university, Polytechnical Institute at the time. I graduated, I went back to work in Trinidad for a few years, and then I came back. Um, and when I came back the second time, it was to get married, and I became a permanent resident. And from there, I became a citizen. And, my parents were here for a couple of years, and I helped them through the immigration process as well, too. So I guess you could say it's in my blood. As what and kind of putting it all together through the graduate diploma program was quite insightful.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting how you went from like an IT program, like computer business systems, to doing a job where you were like literally managing employees coming into Canada, and then you went through the process yourself, and then you helped your family go through the process. So, I mean, even though you had like a completely different background, you still had all of these transferable skills that you brought into what it takes to be an immigration consultant.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Like if I had not had those different jobs at IBM, I was the business unit leader for the internal application development um, applications of IBM Canada in one of those jobs. So I know about working with IT. I know about, all the different functions within the business. I had a job leading the business operations of the application development. So you work with people and different types of programs. In one of my jobs, I actually had international assignees working on the program as well. So yeah, it's all connected, but there's so many different aspects that you need to kind of be cognizant of. Like this, what we're doing today is about immigration, but we have to remember that immigration does not exist in isolation. In fact, there are two other key pieces of that, which, I learned by actually doing, which is the labor or employment laws of Canada, and then also the tax laws of Canada in relation to trade agreements with other countries. Those three pieces are inextricably intertwined. And immigration, we focus on immigration, but we also need to make sure that we are aware of the implications of taxes and employment and labor laws in Canada.
I think that's a really good segue into the next question because I was going to ask you that, I think a lot of people get into immigration consulting because, they love working with people, like you're dealing with people's lives and their immigration journeys. But I think there's also so much more to it, like the technical part of, reading between the lines and looking at legal issues. So I know that you just graduated and, you're still starting out, but what would you say is what aspect is your favorite part, do you think, starting out?
So it's interesting because that's part of my journey right now. I'm
Yeah.
in the process of trying to say, do I want to be a kind of immigration consultant day to day, processing applications, helping, you know, people, for whatever reason, whether they be refugees, workers, or families move, or working more on the policy side of immigration law, or as an advocate, right? A lot of what I did, which at IBM was advocacy and advocating for not just IBM, but in general, IT workers and, short-term temporary labor, right? So that's an important aspect of immigration that is also, an opportunity to get into as a long-term career, right? So there's that, there's even working with IRCC and building the policies. During my time, I, got invited to many IRCC consultations where they go out to companies and get their input on how they can improve their programs. So I had the opportunity to get involved and see the way programs got built. Things like the global skills strategy, which is a really big program that came into being in 2017. And I worked really closely as a representative from IBM and part of the Canadian Employee Relocation Council that I was a member of at the time to provide advice and input and regular meetings with ESDC and IRCC before the program was launched. And we got invited to the actual public launch, which was really interesting to see as well. So there are many aspects of that you can do with the graduate diploma or immigration consulting, because it's just not being a consultant and working with individuals, working with public figures, lawyers, you name it, are also aspects that are quite interesting as well.
Yeah, I think that's really cool that you mentioned that because maybe some students, or people thinking about immigration consulting, you just think about the policy side, but it's cool that you got to see how they're made from like the IRCC perspective, and you got the behind the scenes look at that. I know we also talked a little bit about, your student experience doing the graduate program for that and getting the licensing. And can you talk a little bit about what that was like, some of the challenges that you faced going through the licensing process as a student?
Yeah, so let's talk about the GDIPICL program first.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think anything prepared me. I read everything that said this is a full-time job. This is like a full-time job. Prepare yourself. Um, and I guess it had been, let's just say, over 30 years since I had gone to university before coming back into this program. Now, the first thing is actually getting into the program because it's quite competitive. The application process is, you have to write, um, why do I want to do this? Why do I want to do this? Plus have all the other academic qualifications or experience, business experience as well. But when I entered the program on the first day, it was like, wow, it's all virtual. And you're seeing people in your class from all over the globe, mainly in Canada, but there were people in my class from India, Australia, Syria, I believe, US, Mexico. So you get that interaction um, globally, but also people who are living on the East and the West Coast and everywhere in between. Um, it was an intense, program and by design. Um, and I think that really helps you prepare for what life would be like as an immigration consultant. It really did kind of give you a really great flavor of the types of immigration consultants that there are out there. It's not just helping somebody apply for a visitor visa or a work permit, or maybe helping, reunite a family or a refugee. Each one of those are, so incredibly complicated on their own. And even something as a visitor visa you think shouldn't be complicated, but, I ran into someone who had been rejected 7 times. Why? Right?
Hmm.
The uncovering of why this person may have been rejected and if there's anything that can be done about it is also, could be quite interesting as well too, right? So yeah, so the GDIP program was intense, but for a very good reason. Um, when you graduate, you really feel like you have, accomplished something. And then after graduation, the next step for you, if you do want to go into the consulting profession, is basically to write the CICC, which is the College Citizenship and Immigration College entry to practice exam. So that takes place about 4 times a year, and you really have to prepare. Even after this one intensive year of education, you know, you're doing an exam that is 3 hours long. That's 135 questions. And you basically have, a couple of minutes for each question, and they are quite complicated at times, right, by design.
Hmm.
Um, so getting through that process is the next hoop after you get through the GDIP program. And then after, if you pass the entry to practice, then it's all about getting yourself licensed, which is, another process, which is, takes time, and you really have to think about, well, what kind of immigration consultant do I want to be? What type of, clients do I best work with? Or I feel that I can help most, given my own experience that I'm bringing to the table. So, getting your company name set up, designing a logo, getting all the police certificates that you may need from every country you've ever worked since you were 18. And all of those things are required before you get licensed. So it's quite a long, well, it's an intense process. In some professions, you can say it's long, but maybe not that long considering the impact that your work actually has on the people that you will be working with as clients.
Yeah, yeah, I was just gonna say that too because I remember you mentioned like when we were talking that it's like a 1 year program, but then you look at all of the things that you have to do to get to where you want to be, and it's like there's a lot more that goes into it than just doing school. But I had two questions based on like what you said, because you said that you had a huge gap from when you first did school earlier in your life, and then you are going from this huge gap to like going to school. So I'm sure there were some challenges that you had to face stepping into that student role again. Do you want to touch a little bit on that and how you overcame it, or even like some experiences that you found rewarding, you know?
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to say, I was lucky in the sense that working for IBM, there is always mandatory education that you have to do every year, right? So there's, business compliance and all those things. But also then based on the role that you have, there may be specific education that you need to take. So, it's an environment where you're constantly learning. So I guess from that perspective, it was easier of a transition for me because writing tests or learning and stuff like that, it was my way of life, right? I was constantly learning about immigration, laws or policies or labor laws or policies in order to do my job. So from that perspective, I guess I may have been better prepared. But the work that you have to do, you really want to make sure that this is a profession that you want to enter because it takes commitment. It also takes time, but um, you want to make sure that when you do start the program, you have the time to dedicate it. I saw some of the folks that were in some of my classes who were working full time or whatever, and it was very difficult for them. And I could not imagine myself, trying to do both at the same time. But again, everyone has, works differently and challenges themselves differently. But yeah, the you really need to make sure before you embark on the program that this is kind of the path you want to go down and why.
Yeah. And was there anything like rewarding that you found from your experience being a student or even like after?
Yeah, like, well, certainly, you know, grades are important. They're not important to you kind of like when you're working, but being able to say, yay, I conquered that assignment, I got an A or I got an A plus or whatever, right? Those are some of the rewarding bits. You have the opposite, of course, which is sometimes you may not do as good on an assignment for whatever reason. I remember there was one assignment during the summer where there was a personal, medical emergency that I had to be admitted into the hospital with an ill parent literally the entire day, and then came home at 9 o'clock at night and did one of my final exams for one of the courses, right? I thought I failed it, but then actually I
That's
did
good.
really well. So yeah, the reward comes in so many different ways, and sometimes very simple things can be terribly rewarding.
Hmm. But I know that also like a lot of students find mentorship, that plays a big role when, you're just starting out. Did you have that so far on your journey, or did you have like something, do you receive any good advice from like an instructor, like a senior consultant?
Yeah, the great part about that program is that all of the instructors have experience, work experience. They are actual consultants or they're lawyers, right? So every class that you are in, you get a different perspective from, either a lawyer or an immigration consultant with a tremendous amount of experience. And, many of them, retaining contact with them is an excellent way in which you can kind of build your network, but also seek advice and mentorship when needed. The the college also has a mentorship program, which is fairly new. I know they're a bit behind in terms of, when you graduate, when you pass your licensing exam, and then you start practicing. There's a bit of a gap, but there's an official mentoring program. I personally think, and this was something that happened during the time that we were in class, you work with different people, sometimes really well. So staying connected and setting up a little support group, so to speak, with colleagues that you either went to school with or you met. In my job, I spent a lot of time working with immigration vendors from, the big four, KPMG, Deloitte, Fragomen, and that network also was something that I could leverage as I move forward into where my practice takes me.
Mm. I think that's really great advice for someone, who's looking to get advice from somebody further on in the field. Uh, do you do you have any advice on like someone thinking about immigration consulting? How else can they get hands-on experiences? Do you do internships that shape your perspective? Like what can
Yeah,
you share on that?
yeah, that was interesting because quite a few of the students in some of my classes, they were actually doing the program. They'd work in an environment, so they were doing more of maybe an administrative role for an immigration consultant, or a lawyer, or a company like Ernst and Young or something like that, the tax department of Ernst and Young or something like that, right? So they come into the program not with necessarily direct experience, but with related experience, right? And that all helps, to kind of add some perspective to what you're going to be dealing with in your career when you graduate, right?
Thank you. I also wanted to ask, like, what advice do you have for students or aspiring immigration consultants? Like, if you could tell them something for someone just starting out, what would you tell them?
I would say know yourself, know what you want out of a career um, before embarking on your immigration consulting journey. I had many years to think about it, um, and that kind of built a commitment into seeing this program through to the end. But um, it has to be something that you are personally motivated by. Whatever that reason is, whether it's helping people, whether it's helping refugees, helping to reunite families, or helping people with excellent skills to move to Canada and build a new life. One of the things that I had gotten involved from a volunteer basis while I was working was one of the government programs and a volunteer organization which went to refugee camps in different countries like Syria and Lebanon, where there were lawyers and doctors and really educated people sitting in refugee camps doing nothing. And there was this voluntary organization that went in, help to interview them, prepare them, and then align them to jobs in different, developed countries. And could you imagine, someone with great skills and experience kind of wasting away, basically, in a refugee camp for years, and then all of a sudden their life being transformed by an opportunity, that you basically helped to make
Mhm.
happen. So
Yeah.
yes, it's an extremely rewarding career. Um, but talk to as many people as possible, both, students or and people in practice, but even, in general, lawyers and, folks in business, because that's the other thing you have to do. If you're a consultant and you're running your own practice or even working with a couple of people, you're essentially having to manage a business as well at the same time. And those two pieces are very important, right? You cannot neglect one or the other. Fortunately, the college kind of helps you to keep those pieces together almost, by mandatory requirements that they have. But it's not just I'm focused on immigration consulting, right? I need to be a business person as well. I need to understand how accounting works. I need to understand, what I need to do to market my business, right? You know, build a website, all those
Mhm.
things. It is quite a a variety of skills that goes into becoming, you know, a, an excellent immigration consultant.
Yeah, I love how you shared that real life example with the refugees, because like when you're a student, everything is very theoretical and you don't really see it until you're like on the job and you get to specialize and wear different hats, like being a practitioner and then being an entrepreneur. So there's so much that students can do once
Yeah.
they graduate, which is really, do you see yourself maybe going into like an entrepreneur marketing perspective, or do you think you're gonna stay with policy? Because you said that you mentioned that you had some experience doing that as well.
Yeah, the other thing I didn't mention before is my interest in AI. And that's
Mhm.
something I had an opportunity to work on while I was at IBM. We had a huge challenge, right? And this is basically how you kind of implement AI, where you address a business case, you address a challenge, you address a specific issue, right? And we had tons of rejected applications for a while there. Um, and we couldn't figure out why are these applications being rejected. And then, we put in a great deal of effort. Mind you, it was in the early days of AI back in 2017, 2018. But that is also an aspect that I am really intrigued by in terms of how do we leverage AI into making better immigration consultants, right? How do we use those, tools and applications or build tools to help us in our day-to-day practice. And we have to, like, what I have seen in terms of some of the work that I'm doing right now, just learning, and a lot of this is free. You don't have to sign up for paid courses. So much of AI learning is available for free that you can find, but it is certainly one of the aspects that is going to be a huge growth area for the immigration industry going forward.
Yes, I
So
think
yeah,
you're
I'm thinking about
definitely
what
right.
do I want to do with AI, right?
There's so much now with AI. So we do have like one more minute left. So one last question I want to ask you is if you could describe your journey in one word so far, what would it be and why?
Wow. It would be um just either learning, yeah, learning. Every day I learned something new. And it could be something basic, but it now meant, you internalize it in a very different way than you did, previously. So, you know, be prepared. This is a learning journey, and the entire profession is about learning because things change all the time.
That and it always keeps things interesting because always something new. But thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. It's been great listening from the beginning to the end and for sharing your journey. It's been wonderful to hear how you started out and your goals and the advice that you have for other students. I'm sure it's going to be very helpful to anyone starting out and thinking about going into this field.
I hope so, and I'm always around. You can contact me on LinkedIn.
That's great. Thanks, Troy.
Okay, take care. Thanks so much.